The monarch isn't supposed to be a citizen of Britain. She's supposed to be British, the embodiment of it. Not a person who lives in the country, the still point the whole country turns around. Above politics, above money, above the grubby little games the very rich play with their fortunes. That's the whole idea. That's what the crown is for. So in 2017, when a gigantic leak of financial documents landed in the news, the Paradise Papers, millions of files pulled out of offshore law firms, the world started scanning the pile for famous names. And one name in that pile stopped everyone cold: Her Majesty the Queen. Because buried in those documents was a simple, quiet fact. Millions of pounds of the Queen's private money, held through the Duchy of Lancaster, the estate that pays her a private income, had been invested offshore, in the Cayman Islands, in Bermuda. The exact tax havens politicians condemn from the dispatch box, the exact places campaigners rage about, the exact system ordinary people are told is how the rich quietly opt out of the country the rest of us pay for. The woman who symbolizes the nation had her private fortune sitting comfortably outside it. Now let me be clear about something before we go one step further, because it matters. No law was broken. None. That was never the point, and I'm not going to pretend it was. The point isn't legal. The point is the symbol, and the symbol had an offshore account. And there's one specific investment buried in that offshore portfolio, a fund with a stake in a retailer that was later accused of preying on vulnerable low-income people, that turned an awkward tax story into a genuinely uncomfortable one. I'll show you exactly what it was, but not yet. Because to understand why it lands so hard, you have to understand the contradiction it sits inside first. So stay with me. Here's the contradiction. And it's a clean one. The monarchy's entire value proposition, the reason it survives, the reason people defend it, is that the sovereign stands for the country. All of it. The unity, the shared life, the common purpose. When the Queen appears, she's meant to represent every single person under that flag, rich and poor, north and south, the whole of it, held together in one figure. Offshore investment is the financial opposite of that. It is, by design, money routed out of the national system. That's not an accident of it, that's the purpose of it. A place like the Cayman Islands exists to sit apart from ordinary tax, apart from ordinary transparency, apart from everyone. The entire function of an offshore jurisdiction is to be somewhere your money can live that isn't home. So look at what you've got. The one British person whose whole job is to belong wholly to Britain, with a slice of her private wealth deliberately placed somewhere whose only reason to exist is not belonging. And here's the trap. It doesn't matter that it was legal. Say it with me. It doesn't matter. Because legality was never the standard the monarch is held to. Half the country probably couldn't tell you a single tax law, but every single one of them understands the symbolism of the Queen's money being somewhere that says, not here, not with everyone else. The standard for a symbol was never, did she follow the rules? The standard was, does she belong with us? And on this one narrow point, the money didn't. Okay, so now you've got a problem with no clean answer. And I want you to actually pick a side here, in your own head, as I lay it out. Because which door you walk through tells you how bad this really is. There are only two ways to explain how the Queen's money ended up offshore. Two doors. And I genuinely want your answer in the comments on this one. Door number one. The Queen personally knew nothing. The Duchy's managers made routine investment decisions the way any professional fund manager does, and she was simply a beneficiary at the end of it. The money grew in her name, but the choices weren't hers, and she may never have seen the details. That's the gentle door. That's the one her defenders reach for. But look at what door one actually costs. Because if that's true, then the sovereign is so detached from her own vast private wealth that things are being done in her name, with her money, in offshore havens, that she can't personally account for. And that's its own uncomfortable admission, isn't it? The person who's meant to embody responsibility, so removed from her own fortune that it can drift into Bermuda without her ever really clocking it. Door number two. It reflects a deliberate approach to managing the money, sensible, professional, entirely legal wealth management, the kind any large estate does, in which case the symbol of the nation was actively, knowingly, using the offshore system the nation resents. So which is it? Detached beneficiary or deliberate strategy? Oblivious to her own money or optimizing it offshore? And here's the nasty part. There's no third door where the symbolism comes out clean. Either she doesn't know what her fortune is doing, or she does. Tell me below which one you think is worse for someone whose entire purpose is to represent everyone. Now let's talk about why this landed as hard as it did. Because timing is everything, and the timing here was brutal. The Paradise Papers didn't drop into a calm sea. They dropped into a wave, a genuine, national wave of public anger about tax avoidance. Wealthy individuals, giant corporations, clever accountants, all shuffling money offshore while ordinary people watch their public services get squeezed. That was the mood. That was the story dominating the news. One rule for them, another for us. And into that exact storm, that exact week, comes a leak. And there, in the list of names, is the Queen. You could not design a worse room for that name to walk into, because it fed two things at once. It fed the Republican argument, the people who say the monarchy is just the oldest, grandest version of exactly this elite. And it fed the broader resentment, the of course her money's offshore too feeling that doesn't need to be political to sting. And think about the mechanics of a leak like this. Every other name in the Paradise Papers was, in the public's mind, meant to be there. A hedge fund manager offshore? Predictable. A multinational shifting profits through Bermuda? You expected that before you read a word. The story of those names was, the rich do rich things. But the Queen wasn't supposed to be a rich person doing rich things. She was supposed to be the exception to all of it. So her name didn't just add to the story, it broke the frame of the story. It suggested that even the figure held up as being above the game was, in some quiet corner, playing it. That's a different kind of damage. That's the damage of the last clean example turning out to have a footnote. Now, in fairness, and I'll say it as many times as it takes, the Duchy defended the investments as completely legitimate. They pointed out the Queen voluntarily pays tax she isn't strictly required to pay. Both of those things are true and they matter, and I'm putting them on the table. No law broken. Voluntary tax paid. Legitimate, professionally managed funds. But professionally, the thing at stake here wasn't a legal case. It was the monarch's single most precious and most fragile asset, the sense that she is above all this. That she is, uniquely, on the side of ordinary people rather than the moneyed few. And that sense, that priceless, unmeasurable sense, took real damage from a single line in a spreadsheet. All right, this is the moment I promised you at the start. Let's open it. Because so far this is an optical story. Offshore looks bad, fine. But with optics you can survive. What moved this from awkward to genuinely uncomfortable was one specific detail inside the portfolio. The reporting highlighted that the offshore investments included a stake, held indirectly, through the fund, connected to a retailer that was later the subject of serious criticism. As reported, a company accused of predatory practices toward vulnerable, low-income customers, the kind of business built to profit from people with the least. Sit with the image for a second, not the accusation, the image. The nation's grandmother, the woman who stands symbolically for every struggling family in the country. And her money, however far removed, however many layers down, invested in a fund holding a piece of a firm accused of preying on exactly the kind of people she's meant to represent. That's the knockout, because it drags the whole thing off the abstract shelf. It stops being offshore equals bad headlines and becomes something you can actually picture. Now, I need to be scrupulously fair here, and I mean it. She almost certainly had no personal knowledge of that specific holding. Genuinely. This is not a woman studying a portfolio and choosing a predatory lender. This is money, layers deep, in a professionally managed fund, one holding among many, the kind of detail that never reaches the person whose name is on the account. I'm not convicting anyone of anything. The indirection is real, and it matters. But here's the thing about a symbol. The distance doesn't erase the discomfort. You can be 4 layers removed and it still creates an image that a monarch, of all people, can simply never afford to be attached to. The gap explains it. It doesn't dissolve it. And that's the cruel arithmetic of symbolism. For an ordinary investor, indirection is a complete defense. Nobody blames you for a single holding buried in a fund you handed to a manager years ago. But the monarch isn't judged as an investor. She's judged as a symbol. And a symbol doesn't get the benefit of "she didn't know," because the whole power of a symbol is that it isn't supposed to need to know. It's supposed to be, instinctively, on the right side of things. The moment you have to explain why the money is where it is, the symbol has already taken the hit. The explanation is the wound. Not the crime. There was no crime. The explanation. Quick thing right here, because this is the moment. If you want the rest of these royal money stories told straight, no fairy tales, no fluff, just the receipts and the symbolism laid out plainly, do me a favor and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel more than you'd think. Okay, back to it. Because this isn't really about one investment. It's about a pattern. And once you see it everywhere. The monarchy has a habit, a deep one. It performs frugal, dutiful public service, value for money, working royals, the whole modest, hard-working image, while quietly sitting on top of vast, opaque private wealth. The number the public is shown is the sovereign grant, the official funding, the figure everyone can point to. The wealth the public doesn't see is the other thing entirely, the duchies, the private fortunes, the estates, the holdings. And the offshore investments are that opacity made literal. Money managed out of sight, in the exact jurisdictions built for out of sight, until a leak dragged it into the daylight. That's the flaw. Not a crime, a two-tier financial life. The visible, dutiful, careful monarchy for public consumption, and underneath it, running quietly, a sophisticated, wealth-preserving private operation doing what any large private fortune does. The Queen didn't break a rule here. What she did was embody the gap between the image the country is shown and the balance sheet it isn't. And notice how neatly the offshore detail fits that pattern, because it's not a departure from how royal money works, it's the purest example of it. The whole design of that private wealth is to be quiet, to be managed professionally, out of the public eye, in structures ordinary people never see and were never meant to see. Offshore is just that instinct taken to its logical endpoint. It's the opacity with a passport. And it only became a scandal because for once, the quiet failed. A leak did the one thing the entire system is built to prevent, which is let you look. Now, the defense. Let's actually deal with it properly, because it's a fair defense and it deserves a fair hearing. The Duchy said, in effect, everything was legal. The investments were legitimate. They were professionally managed. And the Queen voluntarily pays tax she isn't strictly obliged to. All true, all worth saying. And frankly, more transparency and voluntary tax than plenty of the other names in those files ever offered. But here's why the defense doesn't quite land where it needs to, because it's answering the wrong question. The public's discomfort was never a legal accusation. Nobody seriously stood up and said, the Queen has committed a crime. That's not what this was. The discomfort was symbolic, it was moral, it was a feeling. And she followed the rules is a perfectly good answer to, did she break the law? But it's no answer at all to, why is the one person who represents all of us keeping her money where the richest few keep theirs? You see the mismatch? The defense answers a question nobody was really asking. And in rushing to answer that one, it's all legal, she pays some tax. It quietly steps around the question it can't answer. It confirms the symbolic problem by only ever addressing the legal one. When your entire reply is, but it was allowed, you've admitted the only thing being asked was whether it should have been. Which brings us to the heart of it, the moral of the whole thing. And I'm going to say this part plainly because it deserves it. The monarch's single job, the one function that justifies the crown, is to stand for the nation. To be the one person who belongs entirely to Britain and to everyone in it. That's the deal. That's the whole deal. The Paradise Papers showed that her private fortune belonged in part to the Cayman Islands and to Bermuda. That's hypocrisy, and it isn't loud, and it isn't criminal. It's a gap. The gap between the symbol and the structure. A sovereign who represents national belonging, with money deliberately placed in the world's great monuments to not belong. Places whose entire architecture exists to keep wealth apart from the country it came from. Legal, yes. I'll keep saying it. But the monarchy has never run on legality. It runs on symbolism. It runs on the feeling. And the symbol sprung a leak. So where did it leave the crown? Let's count who was standing beside it when the dust settled. Defended narrowly, on legality, isolated broadly, on ethics, and named, in the worst possible company, alongside the global super-rich in a leak that was about one single thing: the distance between the elite and everyone else. The anti-monarchy campaigners seized it, obviously, it was handed to them. The tax justice advocates cited it because it was the perfect example. And even the sympathetic observers, the people who genuinely loved the Queen, found that, well, it was legal, was a very thin place to stand. It's not a defense that warms anybody. It's a defense that ends the conversation without winning it. And so the Queen, beloved, dutiful, the actual living picture of national service, the one royal almost nobody wanted to attack, was, for that news cycle, filed among offshore investors, grouped with the exact people she was supposed to be nothing like, alone in the one company a monarch can never afford to keep. That was the isolation, not personal, reputational. The sudden distance between where the public assumed her money was, with us, with the country, and where it actually sat. And here's the part that can never be undone. The leak is permanent. Those files are out, and they don't go back in. The Queen has since passed away, and I want to be respectful about that, genuinely. But the Paradise Papers entry is now a fixed part of the record of her reign. It gets cited every single time royal finances come up for debate. It's not going anywhere. It's carved in. But here's the unsolved thing at the center of it. And I'll say the fair part first, plainly, because it's owed. Nothing here was illegal. The Queen broke no law. She paid tax she didn't strictly have to pay. The Duchy defended every penny of it as legitimate, and on the facts, they're right. And yet, the one person whose entire job was to belong wholly to Britain had millions parked in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda, and no one, in all the years since, ever fully explained why that was thought acceptable for the sovereign. Not why it was legal. Why was it fine? So here's the question, and I genuinely want yours below. Can you truly be the symbol of a nation while your fortune quietly lives offshore? Tell me, because I don't think it's a simple one. And if you want to keep pulling this exact thread, the money the crown would rather you didn't look at too closely, there's a story about the duchy as a landlord, about the ordinary people who rent from royal estates and what that arrangement actually looks like up close, that sits right next to this one. Same question, same crown, different angles. That one's waiting for you right here. I'll see you in it.